My name is Nathan Felton, Nate Felton. I am from the Rochester Institute of Technology. Specifically, I work in the College of Science for a central IT organization known as ITS, Information Technology Services. Ironically enough, out of the 4 computer labs that I am primarily responsible for, only one of them is a Mac lab. So I only actually manage 47 Macs. But I go through all this stuff just because I think it's fun. So I manage 47 Macs in the College of Science at RIT. I have a quick shameless plug that I did the last session, and I'm going to do it again because everyone's here. This is my 8-month-old daughter, Kaylin. So again, thank you. If you see this on YouTube in 16 years, Daddy loves you. Yeah, YouTube is, yeah, Daddy loves you still. Exactly. Whoever your current boyfriend is, get rid of him. All right, our agenda. We're going to go through what I consider advanced workflow stuff and advanced DeployStudio stuff. Now, some of this is pretty much the basic usage of DeployStudio, but I like to make sure that it's as automated as possible, so that I have to do as little as possible, or my co-ops have to do as little as possible. So we're going to go through workflow organization, computer groups, nested workflows, access groups, and runtime environment variables. So workflow organization. First of all, what is it? It basically allows you to organize your workflows in a manner that is visually appealing, but also kind of helps you keep your sanity. And I like to do it up front because if you have organization before you start expanding, you kind of tame the chaos up front as opposed to, oh wow, I have 100 workflows, they're all over the place, how do I organize this? So for me, it's always start at the beginning with the organization rather than trying to play spring cleaning later. So this is how I choose to group my workflows. Now DeployStudio doesn't actually have the ability to group workflows in its own native way. So all I do is I create empty workflows that just have these names. And I gave them kind of a numbering order based on their different groups, based on what they are intended to do. They're pretty much self-explanatory, but primary workflows, what that means is effectively these are the workflows that I have my techs run, that I run on the computer labs. They're the ones you use on a day-to-day. And that's where workflow nesting comes in, is the top ones will actually just nest or run nested workflows, and then those nested workflows are under the 200 and all the way to the 900 category. So this is how I choose to do it, and you can do it as you wish, but I thought this would be a good place to start. Oh, that's right. I'm sorry, I'm all flustered because my stuff wasn't working. There we go. So kind of to show that, we're going to switch over to my little demo machine here. And in workflows, what I like to do, as I was saying, is create empty workflows. So you just create a simple workflow. You can start it with 100 and call it primary. And I'm going to make this really short instead of what I actually typed just because it's faster. And then you would do, say, 200 is configuration, and so on and so forth. And eventually, you will have, however many groups you want to create to actually keep them separated. And as you'll notice, I have 3 workflows here already. So if I created the 900 level, which is my development level, it helps put in that separator between 900 and my 700. Make sense? Okay. Your plus sign's grayed out? Oh, that's because you started editing it. You gotta hit the revert button in the lower right, and then it'll give you your plus sign back. There you go. All right. So that's that. The next thing is we're going to kind of merge these together, so bear with me through this a little bit. But the next part is computer groups. We'll start using the KVM. Computer groups allow you to organize computers into different departments, buildings, however you wish to do it. But most importantly, it allows you to assign a workflow to that group of computers. So if you come in here to computers, I should have a group called defaults, and I would add these computers to this defaults group. Now, once these computers are added, oh, I'm sorry. That's going to be fun. So we have computers, and under the little caret are the groups. you can take computers from here and drag them into your groups. Once they're in this group, you can come over here to automation and select a default workflow to run on that group. So if I wanted to test nesting on this entire group, I could do that, hit save. It'll ask if I want to apply it to members, and yes, I do. So you can see over here on the right now that these computers, their default workflow is my 901 test nesting workflow. So the next time that I run the DeployStudio runtime, as soon as I log in, it's going to just automatically run that workflow. It's not going to give me the option to select a workflow in the runtime. It's just going to run this. And a key note there is this is an awesome preference here, this reset default workflow. So if you run the runtime once, it'll run the workflow, it'll reset, and then the next time you run the workflow again, or the runtime again, it will not automatically run the workflow. It'll give you the list to select your own workflow. Okay? So that's that on computer groups. And revert is your enemy. Oops. What's that? Yes, we're going to try that later. Actually, we're going to try it right now. So what I'm going to have you guys do, this is kind of the interactive follow along if you can part. I already have it set up on here, and I wasn't expecting to use this machine, so it's not blown away. But if you're following along, go to scripts, and I'm going to have you click the little plus sign down here to create a new script. Actually, I'm going to delete the one I'm talking about right now. So plus sign, new script, double click, call it reboot.sh. And all you're going to simply do is come down here. Someone pointed out to point out that you can actually edit scripts in here. This isn't just a read-only area, so you can actually type into your scripts here. Just simply type the command reboot and hit save in the lower right. Pretty simple script, right? So now what we're going to do is we're going to create a workflow that's going to run that script. So right here, 701, 700 for me is my meta tasks. Just various things. I do my reboots in there. We have multiple DeployStudio servers on campus, so I have Netboot scripts that tell if you're booted into one server, it'll tell it to boot to another server, just kind of an example of meta tasks. So what you're going to do here is, I like to use this little, you got to hit the plus sign, my bad. And you want to add a generic task. So I'm going to delete mine for now. Generic task is scripts effectively. So you drag and drop a task in there. And you're going to say command, and you're going to find your reboot script that you just created. And give it a description real quick that says, reboots computer. Pretty simple. Now, if you were in my previous session, this is the thing I wanted to point out again is with scripts, you have two options. You can either run a script in the Netboot environment, or you can run a script postponed. So after you image a machine and the finalized script comes up at the end, checking this checkbox, that'll make it run once you're back into the OS, not in the Netboot environment. What? I'm sorry. Sure. Yep. All right, so first step is create a reboot script. Yep. Okay. Next step is create a new workflow, hitting the plus sign. And then you can double click and name it, whichever you like. And then this part is what I kind of dislike about DeployStudio. You have to press this little plus sign here, and nothing happens, right? I do shift click on the plus sign. And that what happens is DeployStudio usually pops this out, but because you're at full screen, you have to make it show it. So, and then once that's done, you take this task, your generic task, there you go, and you drag that into your workflow. And then once your generic task is in your workflow, you can tell it which command, which script to run. And then hit save, and that's done. Checking my notes again real quick. Okay, so the point to that is going back to computers and their groups. So by default, when a computer, if a computer is not in your database yet, by default it'll just go into computers. It will not go into any groups. If you want it to go into a group, there's a nifty feature here where you can say that this is your default group. So every new computer that checks into the database through the runtime will automatically add itself to this group. And one of the things I tend to do is, if a computer's not in your database already, then it's probably not a computer you manage, and somehow they manage to find the netboot on your subnet or something like that. So what I like to do is I create that meta workflow that reboots the machine, and I tell it that to automatically run that workflow. So if someone somehow mysteriously gets into the Netboot environment, mysteriously is able to log into it, as soon as they log in, it's just going to reboot the machine and kick them back out. Kind of a safety thing. And that you don't want to check the reset because then, it'll, after the first time, they'll actually be able to get in. So that's kind of something we do to make sure that anyone that ends up in there doesn't, get to reimage their machine without backing it up first. So, kind of clear on that? Yeah? Okay. Revert. Where are we? Okay, so let's start workflow automatically. Something I kind of touched on in my previous session is if you want a fully automated environment or a fully automated workflow, you'd want to create a Netboot set that automatically logs into your runtime, and then you'd want to create a workflow that all the automated buttons are checked so that it just keeps going through the workflow tests. And then you want to also, say, have a group for your entire computer lab of 35 machines, go into that group and say, 100 reimage the mountain lion. By setting that, you then, for me personally, I send a script through ARD that netboots the machines to my Netboot set. They automatically log in, they automatically start running the workflow, they automatically quit the runtime afterwards, and they're often on their way to install monkey packages. So my entire workflow with DeployStudio is completely automated and hands-off from start until a user sits down and logs into it for the first time. So just to show you that that can be done. All right. Nested workflows. I'm going to switch over here real quick. Nested workflows work good, but they don't work the way I wanted them to originally. So nested workflows, you can only do nesting one level deep. So you cannot do, I'll show this more, but you cannot say, select this workflow, and then the second workflow cannot nest again. You can only go, 101 to 201. You can't have 201 also go to 301. What you'd have to do in that case is you'd have to say 101 runs 201 and then also runs 301. You can't have it keep going. It can only do it one level. And embedded workflows allow for two methods. They allow for static and dynamic. Dynamic is done through scripts, and you can make it pick a workflow based on information, which we're going to go over, or you can say statically always run this specific workflow. So switching back, I'll show you that real quick, hopefully. There we go. Oh, nope, wrong one. There we go. All right. So workflows. As I was mentioning before, my 100 level are all my primary workflows. So what I typically have is a workflow called 101, mountain lion reimage. Now I'm a stickler for naming, so it's actually a lot prettier than this normally. But just to get the point across. Mountain lion reimage actually starts out with an image task. So I would actually come down here and say restore, and if I had images on here, I would pick the image to restore. So that's the starting point. The thing that we do with nested workflows is it allows for two things. It allows you to re-image, but it also allows for out-of-box experience. And what that allows for, and I believe this was covered in another session, but I actually worked with Brian over here at Allendale, and what we did is we had brand new MacBook Pros straight out of the box with a fresh Apple image. Rather than re-imaging those machines and taking that extra time to push an image that's already on there, we decided to do like a remediation instead, an out-of-box. So instead of re-imaging and then applying settings, we chose to set up our workflows in a way where we could just apply settings or install software that we need. So that's why nesting is kind of important, at least in our environment. So what we would do is we would actually have, say, workflow 102, and this would be mountain lion out-of-box experience. So your first one would actually image. Your second one would not image, and it would instead just start running nested workflows. Now, what do I mean by nested workflows? So, for example, in configuration, we would create a workflow that was 201, and it would be Active Directory bind. So in here, we would do an AD bind, wherever that is, Active Directory binding, put in all of our information, and save that. And then up here, for the reimage, we would say nested workflow. And we would say that that nested workflow was our Active Directory binding. And we would save that. I apologize for the resolution. So our reimage would do an image and then Active Directory binding, where our out-of-box experience would simply do the nested workflow of Active Directory binding. So just like that, you only have to make the workflow to Active Directory bind once, and then you can nest it into your other workflows. And that works out great because now, if I wanted to, I could re-image this Mac that already has an image on it, and I also have it bind to AD, or I can pull this Mac out of a box and say out of box bind to AD. So there's much more to it, but that kind of gives you the general idea. Yep. Let me keep going. Oh, dynamic, right. So the next thing that they allow you to do, for example, is if you come up here, you can see you can do returned by script. And this was a huge thing, in my opinion, as far as being able to automate. So DeployStudio, by default, gives you this DS workflow selector script, which you can come over here and take a peek at what the one is they give you by default. Their default, and I'm sorry if you can't really see it, but their default basically says, what is the model identifier of this Mac? If it is, in fact, a MacBook Air 3 2, then run the workflow that they have. So this is where things become very, very powerful, in my opinion, because you can have images based on models. I actually run it based on location. All of my computer labs start with a 3-letter acronym. So if you're in the Liberal Arts Mac Lab, LAM, it actually will decide to run a specific configuration workflow just for that lab. And if you're in a different lab, it'll run that lab's specific workflow. So this accepts Bash. It accepts, I'm pretty sure it accepts Python and Ruby as well. I've never actually tried it, so don't quote me on it. I've only ever done Bash. But to give you the idea, that's how powerful it can be as far as dynamically automating your environment through workflows and DeployStudio. I actually kind of have an example for this. Unfortunately, things aren't as set up as I wanted them to, so it's kind of there, but not really. So what I want you guys to do is, what I want you guys to do is if you have a computer available to do the testing, I want you to create these 2 workflows to test nesting. So I already have them made, but just create 2 workflows. One called 901 test nesting. People playing jokes on me. And one called 902 nested workflow. The first one, oh geez, I keep doing that. So 901 test nesting, 902 nested workflow. Create nested workflow first, and you can drag a task out of the tasks available to just be an alert. We're just doing some testing. What in the heck keeps going on here? There we go. So yeah, I just use an alert and I just say, hey, NetFlow is working. Then your first one is going to actually nest that by statically. We're going to do static first. So there's your nested workflow. So you're going to create a second one that's test nesting. You're going to add a workflow task to it. That workflow task is going to be the 902 nested workflow that you created. I really hate that revert. And this one's going to have the alert. Pretty simple. Any questions on that? Am I being unclear in any way? No? Okay. Now, if you choose to, you guys can test this out by running the runtime locally on your machine. Runtime icon in the top left makes it kind of easy to launch, as long as it doesn't pinwheel on me again. Okay, next year I'm bringing kittens to sacrifice to the demo gods. What's that? Honestly, I don't know the answer to that. The question is, does DeployStudio like more memory versus less memory? The server I run it on is the last ever made Xserve running 6 gigs of RAM, and I've never had any problems with it. The machine that I build my Netboot sets on only has 4 gigs of RAM. I've never really had any issues. So usually it's mostly disk I/O. So solid state or Fusion is the way to go, if possible. Hey, it finally ran. So if you follow along, great. If not, you can watch. So I'm just going to log into my runtime, hopefully, possibly. Maybe not. So someone asked me in my first session, does the DeployStudio usually take this long, or does it crash this often? And the answer is no. Talking with Rusty, I think it's just something to do with the network in here, because this right now is me actually plugged into the network, and it's semi-working better. Killing me here. No, I tested all this yesterday. It worked just fine, but... All right, well, take my word for it, it works. How about that? So this is to kind of get back on topic, this is the static way of doing things. And I kind of showed you this up top with the reimage person here. This is all static nested workflows. Did it finally work? No? No. It worked last night in the hotel room. It just doesn't work here. 2, I think I set my IP address to. I don't remember. Oh. Oh, yeah, thanks. Okay, so there you go. Because, well, it automatically ran it because as you remember, back here in defaults, I said 901 testing was my default. So as you saw, as soon as I logged into the runtime finally, it automatically ran that. The second part that you'll notice is that it actually just you didn't actually see anything for test nesting. It just went straight to the nested workflow, the alert. So you don't actually get to see anything when it selects the next workflow, but you get the idea of how it just goes straight into the nested workflow. Where are we here? Workflows. So test nesting and nested workflow. Now back here, again, we're doing a static nested workflow. The other option is to make it dynamic by using a script. So we're going to say to use the DS workflow selector. We're going to save that. We're going to go back into scripts. And just to make it easy, because the script already exists, obviously none of us in the lab are on a MacBook Air 3.2. So I'm just going to put in a quick else statement here. And the way that the workflow selector works is they have a keyword that the DeployStudio runtime recognizes. And that's you just simply have to echo that out. And all it is all one word, runtime select workflow. And it allows for 2 options to be set here, to be stated, I guess, or set. Is back here in workflows, you can either take what the title of the workflow is, in this case we're doing 902, or you'll notice over here on the left or the right that there's an identifier for each workflow you create. This is something I actually just learned last night. You can actually double click this and select the workflow ID as well. So you can use either one of those to describe which workflow you want to select. So I'm going to put in the identifier and just end your quote. So that simple string will tell the runtime through a script which workflow to use. And this actually, again, how I use it to describe, based on your host name, run this workflow. Based on your host name, run this workflow. So you just kind of keep going with I use a case statement, but you can use an if else if you want. Save. We're going to come back here to this. It's going to say return by script, DS workflow selector. I'm going to, if people didn't know this, in edit there's a refresh option. I don't know if you actually need to do it, but I do it anyways. And you'll notice again it runs straight to the nested workflow. So the difference was before we were saying statically go to this workflow, now it's using the information that this is in fact not the model identifier of MacBook Air 3.2 and ran the workflow through using the call. So to me this is a very powerful feature within DeployStudio as far as if you have multiple locations, multiple labs, anything multiple like that. It helps automate a lot more. Okay. Any questions so far? I know this isn't as straightforward as I had hoped. Good so far? Okay. Go back to this guy. So this just goes into showing how the dynamic workflows work again using the runtime select workflow. I included kind of a snippet here so that when the slides become available, you guys can see how this works. Originally, I was going to have you all change it to be Mac Pro 8.2, which is the Mac Pros available in the lab, and then also make your own select workflow, either using the name or the identifier. So again, those are in the slides so that afterwards you can kind of follow along. Yep. So what I do is, again, all my computers start with a 3-letter acronym and then a dash. So I just use a grep or something like that. I forget exactly how I do it. So only grab those first 3 letters of the host name. And then based on those first 3 letters, it just does a case statement to figure out which lab or which workflow to run. Unfortunately, I should have brought some of my scripts, but unfortunately I didn't bring any of mine from work with me. But maybe it's something I can post afterwards. So I do hope to follow up on both my sessions with blog posts and scripts and slides and stuff like that. Access groups, another extremely powerful part of DeployStudio in my opinion, especially if you have multiple people using the DeployStudio server. The big thing to note here is there's three different things you can assign access to. And hopefully if this doesn't crash on me again, it did. Let's try that. Nope. How about now? There we go. Okay. Earlier, someone again had asked, can you run DeployStudio Assistant after it's already configured? The answer is yes. So I'm going to come in here to my DeployStudio server and hopefully just have it work. So here, these are the three different locations that you can set your groups. You can do assistant setup, which is what we're running right now. As you can see, assistant setup is what you use to configure your DeployStudio server. So obviously you'd want to restrict who has access to do that. At the beginning you saw I had to type in my credentials. That is where it does the check. So you can add a group here and say, if you're not a member of this group, you can't log into it to configure DeployStudio. The next one is DeployStudio admin, which is what we're actually running here. Obviously this is how you modify the workflows that you're using. You don't want anyone to have access to that might change it so that you might think, oh, I'm binding to AD, but it really reimages your machine. So you want to restrict who has access to modify your workflows. And again, you can set a group there. Now the first two, kind of a limitation, you can only use one group. So typically what I like to do is create a DeployStudio admin group, a local group on the box, and then for me we use Active Directory. We nest Active Directory groups into that DeployStudio admin group. And then for the assistant setup and DS admin, that's the one group we choose to use for both of them. Then that way we control through Active Directory groups who has access to actually modify anything on the DeployStudio server. Having said that, this one here, who actually has access to the DeployStudio runtime, allows for multiple groups. Now, I'm going to kind of jump around just a little bit here. You'll notice in here, you can only set, I can't notice that because I don't have it made yet. But typically, you can only set one access group per workflow. So having said that, if you create a group that you want everyone to have access to a workflow, then you need to make sure that you nest other groups into the everyone group. So going back to my slides real quick, I actually have 4. Come on. There we go. I have 4 groups that I choose to make. I have an admin group at the top, my senior technicians, my general IT, which is mostly like the help desk or incoming technicians, and my end users. A lot of people, well, I shouldn't say a lot of people, I know people who use DeployStudio as a self-service, so that's where the end users come in. You can create workflows to say, install Adobe Creative Suite. And you can assign the end users access groups so that they can see that workflow. So what I typically do though is I'll create my admin group, I'll create all 4 groups. The admins group will be by itself. Senior technicians, however, will actually be rolled and nested into admins, and so on and so forth. End users, general IT, and senior technicians will all be rolled into admins. General IT and end users will be rolled into senior technicians, and it'll go from there. That's how you have to do nesting, because you can only assign one group to a workflow. Kind of make sense? Any blank stares? Okay. So actually, let me go through that, because I've got plenty of time to kill. Let's actually do that real quick. So, hopefully nothing breaks, but... Switch, thank you! I did all this practicing, and then all of a sudden they threw a KVM at me, and I'm like, ah! So groups. So users and groups. I'm going to create my 4 groups. So, create, group, full name, we're just going to do DeployStudio, yep, DeployStudio admin, create group, easy enough. And we're going to make our DeployStudio user, we'll make both my admin account and my DeployStudio an admin. Then we're going to create the next one in the list, which was DeployStudio techs. And we would just say that I had a standard account. Obviously, we do all this through Active Directory, but just to show the point, we'll just say tech. So I would then add my tech to my DeployStudio techs. However, I would then also add my DeployStudio admin group to the group as well. Okay? Make sense? Okay. So then, if I come back to my DeployStudio assistant, now I don't know how fast this keeps up. Oh, it does, good. So DeployStudio runtime, I'm going to say DeployStudio admin is a group, and then we're also going to say DeployStudio text is a group. And then if I did my other two groups, they would also be added to this. However, at the same time, I could say, DeployStudio admins here, and DeployStudio admins, not dep. No. It is, but you have to add each group you want to make available in the access group portion of the workflow. So if you want both groups to show up, you have to add them to that section. Does that make sense? Okay. So now I have both my groups available, or will have both my groups available. Hopefully everything works okay. It doesn't crash. So I'm actually going to quit out of admin real quick. We're going to open it back up, just because the service restarts afterwards. Now if I come into my workflows, I can come into my access group, and you'll see my two groups I just created. So, now, how do I want to show this? So, for example, if I say that my reimage, I only want me as an admin the ability to actually reimage a machine, because I don't want to chance someone reimaging and not getting a backup or anything like that. So only DeployStudio admins can reimage. However, any of my techs I want to be able to do out of box. So they can pull a brand new computer that someone just walked into the office with and run our configuration on it. So that's how those access groups work. Now, if you come back to the runtime and you reload, let me try logging out. Yeah, log out. So if I log in as the admin account, hopefully, I can see Mountain Lion reimage and Mountain Lion out-of-box experience. Now, if I log out again and decide to log in as tech, I can now only see out-of-box experience. I can't even see the workflow that allows me to reimage this machine. And that's another thing to note as well. By default, these all have no access group assigned. If you choose to come in here and just, well, I guess not. At one point, they had the ability so you could actually make it so that there was kind of a no group. So you had to assign a group before it could show up to anyone. So in that case, what I would recommend is create a nobody group. Or the other option is if you don't want anyone except for admins to see these, you come through, and if I don't want them to ever see configuration, I could just say only admins can see this, only admins can see this, and you just keep going through so that only admins see all these. Come on. No? Okay. So now only admins can see all these. Now right now I'm logged in as tech, right? So if I do a refresh, all of those just go away. You can't even see them. Now, big question I had at one point was, well, if AD is a nested workflow configuration, but only admins can see it, then how does that help my techs? And the answer is they only need to be able to see the top workflow. If you nest a workflow, access doesn't apply. If it skips that whole check, I guess you could say, the privilege check there, the access check. So because DeployStudio admin can see AD, he'll see it in the list, but because out-of-box experience references it, or at least it should, we'll say AD, he'll still be able to run the out-of-box experience, and it'll still run that workflow. Make sense? Okay. So that's really powerful. We again, we try to make only our 100 level, we call them, available to everyone, or I'm sorry, to all of our senior techs. Out-of-box we'll make available to our general IT people, and then actually, I think out-of-box might actually even be available to our end users, so that they can, bring a brand new Mac on campus and just have it configured to work on with our standards and stuff like that. So very granular, but the key point there that we had a trouble point with at one point was the nesting of groups, because again, you can see you can only apply one group at a time here. Okay? 35 minutes to kill. The next thing is runtime environment variables. So if you actually go into scripts, another one of the included default script examples kind of lists all of the runtime environment variables. Runtime environment variables that are available. And these, again, can be used to automate more stuff. One of the scripts I'm not going to cover today, but I'm going to post later on my blog, What it actually does, and shout out to Jeremy Reichman for this, is it actually runs the system profiler command and then compresses that profile and uploads it to our DeployStudio server. So every time a computer talks to the runtime and runs a certain workflow, it actually will take a snapshot of the system profiler and put it on our server for us. And then that way, if it's ever lost or stolen or anything like that, we kind of have a snapshot of all the information that's in system profiler. So, and one of the ways we do that is we use this variable called repository path. Because when you run the Netboot environment, it mounts your repository, your AFP share, but it's not always the same static name, so they give you this variable to be able to find the dynamic name of the share. There's a whole bunch of other ones that are available in here. Sometimes we'll actually use serial number, model identifier, or even there's computer group in here somewhere. Yeah, right here, computer group. So you can use these variables based on how you want to set up your scripts or anything like that. You could be model identifier if they're in a certain group. Again, I use it based on host name, but that's just because that's how we have it set up. So, and the cool thing about this is you can run this script at Netboot, or you can run it in the runtime in the booted OS, and this script itself will literally just dump all of the variables, so you can kind of get an idea of what the variables look like, so you can create your scripts. Custom property. I don't think I actually have this in my slides. No. So custom properties. I do not use this, but a colleague of mine does, so I decided I'd mention it. What this allows you to do is, in the computer area, you can set custom properties here. So, and that's what that keyword will allow you to do, is it will allow you to set those custom properties during a workflow, during a workflow. To be honest, because I don't use it, I don't know what he uses it for, but I do know that it helps with automation. I believe what he does is he takes some information about the final hard drive name or something like that and puts it in as a custom property so he can run self-service scripts on it later. But it allows you to set these custom properties on and you can even set them in here before you image a machine, so whatever. And so you can set the key and the value, and then you can use those scripts during imaging later as well. So something to note there. That, yes, I plan to. That's a good point. The question was, will I put this on my blog? And yes, I will. Once I figure out a way that it's actually properly used rather than me just babbling about it. Oh, this is another one that I actually just learned about this weekend. Runtime abort workflow does just what it says. If you get to a certain case statement in your script and you decide, whoa, something's wrong, like, oh, there's actually information on this hard drive, I don't want to reimage it, you can throw this keyword in there and it'll bail out of the workflow so that you're not accidentally reimaging a machine that has user data on it. Just kind of a quick off the top of my head use for that. These examples are included with every default install. I encourage any of you to take a look at them because they kind of give you, there's really no documentation besides what the community puts out there. So this is kind of like the inside, look is the, how they want DeployStudio to work, but they don't document how it works. So I definitely take a look at these every time there's a new version because they've updated them in the past. Kind of another thing that I don't have planned, but I'm going to show you anyways. DeployStudio, as most of you know, is closed source, but it doesn't mean you can't figure out what's going on. And in saying that, what I mean, so DeployStudio is housed at Applications, Utilities, DeployStudio Admin, Contents. I wanted to change directory, so we're going to go back here and do that. You'll notice here that there's a Frameworks folder. And in that Frameworks folder, and it just keeps going down, and I'm going to go into it in a second, is actually where they keep a lot of the scripts that the tasks you set in a workflow call. So we're going to go into Frameworks, VS Core, Framework. Come on, I can tape today, I swear. They have a couple symlinks in here, so I usually typically just go straight into Resources. And this is where you will see Tools. Now, scripts are the default scripts that we already see in the admin. So, I mean, if you want to look at them, again, if you happen to modify one and you want to get it back, that's where the default scripts come from, is that folder. But tools are actually where they keep the scripts that the tasks call. So we're going to tools, and you'll actually notice that they have some of the tools that they use for different things. For example, they just added the Fusion, right here, make Fusion drive. In 1.6.0, they just added the task to make a Fusion drive. This is a Fusion Mac. So as soon as it came out, I was like, oh, that's cool, let's take a look at it. So if we just do a cat on make Fusion, you can see exactly how they're taking the task and manipulating the data set in the task to just run basic command line scripts, basic bash scripts, I should say. So you can come through here and you can take a look, and really all they're doing at some point is they're creating they're using core storage to create the Fusion drive, the logical volume. So you can play, if you understand the tools, you can kind of look through and see exactly what they're doing. One thing I will note is modifying these scripts don't necessarily mean it's going to work the way you want it to with the task. So my recommendation is if you don't like the way the task or the task script works, make your own. But at least reference how they did it so you kind of get an idea. So make your own script and just run a generic task workflow in DeployStudio. And the other thing I just want to show here is there's actually another folder called Common. And I'll just do an OS. You can see here, these are pretty much all in conjunction with the tasks. So here's the Active Directory binding. They actually have a script that points to a script in this folder. But Active Directory binding, there's an Open Directory binding one, netbooting, it just goes on. But if you're ever curious to see what the tasks actually do, this is a good place. And just for reference, that's where that place is. Yes? GitHub.com/Nate Felton. Again, I'm a dual platform PC sysadmin. Unfortunately, the Windows side takes my time away from the Macs, and I only manage 47 Macs. So I try to play with this as much as possible because I love Macs so much more than Windows or PCs. But I write some scripts. I know there's a couple other people in the community that are really involved with it. Rusty is very involved with DeployStudio. I know Rich Troutman is. I believe Nate Walk is as well. No, I think he's more into Casper or something like that. But there's other people that write scripts, and GitHub is a great resource. So I believe, do you have scripts available on GitHub for, yeah, for DeployStudio? Yeah. Oh, that's right. He actually writes backup user. Right, and yep. It's one of his repos. Yeah. He also, there's 3 different scripts. There's a Ruby, a Python, and a Bash script that all do warranty information. Going back real quick to the Python, or not the Python, the profile thing I was talking about that takes a snapshot. At one point I wrote this really cool patch to his script that would actually pull warranty information from Apple's website and inject it into the profile. So again, you kind of had a snapshot in time as the, if you lost a computer, oh, well, this sucks that we just lost a computer that's got 300 days left of warranty. But it was kind of really cool to see that, and again, I wish I had brought some with me. But yes, GitHub is a great resource. I actually have a final slide that I'll show that has some resources I use on a day-to-day basis where I'm available to ask questions if you want to. So I'll get to that at the end. Great question, though. Anyone else have a question while I'm kind of paused? No? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorta. There is not an officially supported way of doing that, but when you create your repository, so for those of you that were paying attention earlier, I like to put pretty icons on my folders. So I changed the icon to the icon of the DeployStudio, the logo. So to answer your question, in databases are your workflows. And they're all actually named the unique identifier that you see inside of the admin console. So and they're just p-lists. I mean, that's mostly what Mac is for the most part when it comes to configurations are p-lists. And luckily, the admin or the developer of DeployStudio chose that format. So you could just easily save this somewhere. I actually have a script that runs every night that actually will back up this entire folder minus my packages and my masters, I think. But that way it gets this database folder. The by hosts is actually the computer database, which is sorted based on the serial number. If you chose your serial number to be your unique identifier. But then also, yes, all your workflows are just simpleplists in there. All right? And you actually, a note about that real quick is you can actually modify stuff in these plists if you start getting to that advanced level. The thing to note, though, is you actually have to restart the service of DeployStudio to read it if you manually change the plist. All right? That was a pain in the butt for about 2 hours. It's just a launch daemon. So you can either use the preference pane to on and off it, or you can load, unload the launch daemon. That's the easiest way I found. There might be other ways to make it reread it or something like that, but it was easy enough to say on, off, on, whatever. Any questions? Oh, yes. Assign the access group to run the script. This here, so that's in the DeployStudio Assistant step. So when you go through here, when you go through your configuration, blah blah blah, this is where you get to populate which access groups appear. All right. Do you need more clarification, or okay? Okay. Yeah. So and. Again, to answer your question from earlier, you need to list multiple groups even if they're nested, because if you don't have the multiple groups listed, they don't show up in the dropdown. All right. It doesn't come into play as far as imaging. It only comes into play as far as your process to use DeployStudio if you have other people using it with you. Again, we do everything through Active Directory. And nested groups in those 4 groups to see to allow who can see which workflows. Mentioning this again is as long as they have access to the first workflow, the access group doesn't affect any nested workflows. So as long as they can see the top level one, that they're golden to run it. Okay. Any other questions so far? Oh yes, yeah. So the question was, can I go through the master replica process? And the answer is, I've never done a replica, so I don't feel comfortable talking about it. What I can tell you, and again, I mentioned this in the previous session, I do know it's basically just doing an rsync to whatever replicas it has set up. But yeah, I do know that the other part of replica is when you're creating the Netboot set or a flash drive, you have the primary and the alternative. That's usually where replicas come in, is, you'd have the alternative be one of your replicas in case the network link is down or something like that. But I've never actually set it up, so I don't really feel comfortable talking about it too much because I don't know. Has anyone else set up a replica? Any good, bad, indifferent? No, you're done talking. Here.
If you image machines off the replica, it's supposed to technically do, when it does the rsync, it's supposed to sync, like, if you've added new machines in, sync those back. Sometimes it doesn't grab those, or it doesn't grab all the information 100%, but other than that, it works pretty well.
One thing I will note, because I did play with it at one point, but I don't actively use it, is, to his point, is sometimes the replicas don't replicate back to the master very frequently, so sometimes they won't show up by the time you'd expect them to. So, but the reason I know it's rsync is because I went in to look to see how it's syncing, so you can actually kind of force that script to fire off more frequently if you want to. So you can make it work better, I guess. Yes, that's right. Yes, now that you mentioned that, I remember that now. It's I believe it's just not a cron, launch daemon. Okay. Any other? Yes. Yes. The question is, can you use open LDAP groups? And basically anything that you can authenticate to this local Mac on, DeployStudio recognizes it. Uses the same search paths. So kind of on that note, one point someone asked me, well, why don't you just include your Active Directory groups in there? Because you can. If if you're bound to Active Directory, and you start typing in Active Directory group, it'll show up. The problem is at RIT we've got over 50,000 groups, so it usually tends that so typically, earlier I've said that usually DeployStudio doesn't crash. That's the exception, is when you're trying to load 50,000 group objects. Yes? So as far as Active Directory binding is concerned, I can admit that it's, I don't want to say flaky, but it's, your mileage will vary. With mine, we actually just started having a bug with ours, and I believe it came down to your time, actually. The time on the client wasn't set right. The NTP hadn't kicked in or something, so it wasn't allowing to bind because the times were different. So that's something to note. But yeah, usually when Active Directory binding fails in DeployStudio, I don't blame DeployStudio, I blame Active Directory, or some kind of configuration that would normally prevent binding. So my recommendation there is, try manually binding. Having said that too, though, DeployStudio again just uses a script. It uses dsconfig.ad, and that's what we were actually noticing at one point is we could GUI bind to the domain controller, but using dsconfig.ad it was failing for some reason. And I never actually figured out what resolved it. It pretty much rebooted 3 times and it started working again. So, but I can tell you that there are differences, obviously, between a GUI and the command line. And DeployStudio pretty much only uses command line. I don't think it uses any actual, I'm not a developer, but Cocoa commands or whatever the heck they are. Yeah. Correct. Yes. And that again, I wish I had brought some of my workflows with me, but yes, that's actually at the beginning of my workflows now, is it sets the NTP clock or the time to be my NTP server. What does it? Okay. Right. Interesting. Okay. I've never experienced that, but okay. I gotta try and. Right. Correct. By default, it tries to use time.apple.com. Doesn't do you much good if the machine you're trying to netboot doesn't have access to the internet. So make sure you change that if you need to. Any other questions? Yeah, I'm getting to that. I got 16 minutes left. I am killing time. So that was groups. That was environmental variables. I was going to have you go through that. We already covered importing by CSV, so great job for getting to that before me. And I covered custom properties. So this is the Q&A portion. These are my resources. You can get to me on Twitter at Nate Felton. My GitHub is Nate Felton, N8 Felton. I just started trying to get into the blogosphere, kind of a decade late, I guess, but at least I'm getting there. So that's my WordPress right now. Also, a great resource that I auto-log into every time I log into my computer through Pigeon is irc.freenode.net. There's a channel called OS10 Server, OS10-server. Big thing to note there is you got to get the double hashtags, because if it's double, it's not single like most IRC channels usually are for some reason. So those are the resources you can either get to me at or read stuff from me. I am going to try and make more sense of a lot of this advanced session and get some more of the example scripts and stuff like that up onto both GitHub and my WordPress, my blog. Is anyone here not familiar with GitHub? Raise your hands. Okay. I can show it off real quick. Actually, no, I can't because this computer's not enough. Oh, that's a good point. Actually, this one's on the network, I'm pretty sure, so. Oop, that's not what I wanted. Everyone shut off your Wi-Fi. So this is loading. So this is, honestly, I don't know if there's a difference between the public version and I'm logged in right now, but as you can see, I have 8 stars on my Mac OS X scripts. Some of the scripts I have in there right now, which I can try and show you. I actually have a folder dedicated to DeployStudio. Right now, the only script I think I have in here is my Netboot, yes. So this is a Netboot script that I actually use with ARD to send a command to Netboot to a specific Netboot set. I try to do as many variables as possible, and this little if statement was basically because they changed bless between Snow Leopard and Lion, so that kind of detects that. But you can see, as I said before, if you need to boot a 10.6.8 Netboot set from Snow Leopard, that's what that's for. And then you can also, last time I updated this was when 10.7.3 was out. So, but it still works today. You just got to keep updating your Netboot sets. But that's kind of an example of one of the scripts I have available, and I'm hoping to post more up there that I use, both for myself and again, a good buddy of mine, Brian Meehan. I helped him get his DeployStudio environment set up at his institution. So I have plenty of scripts to share. I just got to make sure I can legally share them. Any other questions? We got 13 minutes, and I basically intended this portion to be a little bit of a discussion between people, kind of hear their experiences, but also to answer questions if you have any. Yes? So this goes back to the debate again between monolithic and modular imaging. What I choose to do, did I cover this in the beginning? No, I think it's right, the first session, thank you. So to give you an idea of what my environment is, I choose to do an instant image for my base image. Instant image will actually take iWork, iLife, and Office 2011 because I have site licenses for those 3, and jam them into my base image. And then that way I get a bit level or a block level restore on those. So that's my base image that I start out with. Then I go through and I run nested workflows that do configuration, things like turn off sleep, enable software firewall and things like that, enable secure memory, yada, yada, yada. And then, so I go through all those steps, I bind AD, OD, etc. And then the very last step I do is I actually have the monkey install package in here and have a package install workflow. And the next thing after that is a deferred script, postponed script that sets, my monkey repo, and then I also set which manifest to point to. So to get a little more to your question, I decide to basically only have a base image with Office, iWork, and iLife, and then after that everything else is done through Monkey, except for configuration. That was something at one point I wanted to try and have kind of a trifecta going, where Puppet would do my configurations, Monkey would do my software, and DeployStudio would do my imaging. So right now it's kind of, for the configuration side of things, it's a set it and forget it. I like to think of it as the once in MCX. And then after that, Monkey takes care of everything else. And the reason for that is simply because, there's usually software that updates so often. If I re-image, I want to make sure it gets the latest software. But then you kill 2 birds with one stone, that you're re-imaging at the latest software, but so do all the clients you've already deployed. So, okay? Yes? Say that again, I'm sorry. So not to Active Directory. I'm doing it through DNS, which has its own challenges for me, just because it does on my network. But what I do is I actually have a separate script that DeployStudio will actually try and name it whatever it has in the computer database, but then I have a script later that'll actually go out and do a dig command on its IP address, find the host name from DNS, and then do DS util, DC util, whatever the commands are, to change the local host name and stuff like that. At one point, kind of a side note, at one point I was actually changing the hard drive label name to whatever the host name was, but then that actually broke DeployStudio later because some of my DeployStudio runtime or workflows reference Macintosh HD directly. So it was killing my workflows because it was no longer named Macintosh HD. It was called DOS Mac 1. But yes, I use DNS to change my host names. And I make sure that the host name change script happens before any scripts that, what do I do based on host name? You got to set the host name first and then run your scripts afterwards. So I will try and I'll try to at least post screenshots of my DeployStudio environment at work because personally I'm proud of it. I like how all my stuff nests and stuff like that. So I will try and post that so that people can see them, and if they have questions, they can ask, how I did it that way or why I did it that way or anything like that. Okay? Yes? Yeah, we on the computer labs, we blatantly do not care about the student's data if it's on the local machine. Flash drives are so cheap now, like, put it on a flash drive. Kind of a lie there is on the Windows side. I actually do folder redirection on my Windows side. But, what's that? Was dual booting at one point. You'll actually have noticed that one of my categories was 800 was dual booting. Kind of a shout out to Chris Sheck. He got that working for me at one point. Had 3 classes that used it over the course of an entire year and said, not worth the time. So I just gave up on it. We actually managed to hack together a refit to still work on Mountain Lion at one point. I don't know if it still works, so no one asked me for it because I don't know. But yeah, we used refit and we dual booted and did native and all that kind of stuff and had all the fun, time synchronization issues that prevented you from logging into AD. But to directly answer your question, yes, if we have problems with a computer, be it Windows or a Mac, we just, SCCM boot the PCs or DeployStudio re-image the Macs and just blow it all away and bring up a new one. When I'm only doing one at a time, I'll do it hands-on. I'll go and sit down at the computer. I'll have my co-op go sit down at the computer, hold the option key, netboot it, and by that point I've already disabled my auto netboot, so it doesn't automatically just log in and image the machine. So he sits there, logs in, selects the proper workflow, and it's off and away. And literally at that point it's 100% hands-off the way I have it set up. You select re-image, and then at that point it images, configures monkey, and just kills the network by dumping, gigabits of installs off of Monkey. So, yeah, it was awesome when I first got it going because I don't know if I mentioned this in my session, but I was talking to someone at one point. Literally, when I started my position almost 5 years ago now, we were still walking around with a FireWire drive, machine to machine to machine, one by one, and imaging them that way. So to have gone from that with a monolithic golden master image to what I have now, it feels great, and it's so much easier to maintain. So, yes. Yes, I currently... So, AD is only single sign-on. It's all we get with AD. We have network accounts, AD network accounts that all the students have. We use AD to single sign-on. We have applications that tie into it. Anyone use Papercut? Papercut? So we use Papercut to track their quotas and stuff like that, and it all ties in again through Active Directory. Yeah, that's pretty much it. OD does MCX for me. I'm considering, eventually moving the profiles and stuff like that. But right now I set things like what they see on the dock, what's on the desktop. I try and still set their desktop background. Yes. Yeah, if I ever actually have again, I only have 47 Macs, so trying to justify playing with that stuff is sometimes hard. But that's what I would like to get to is, kind of the new golden triangle of, Monkey, DeployStudio, and Puppet. So.
You said you have 47 Macs. What else? What's your other workload?
Oh, my other workload is mostly PCs. Unfortunately, I'd probably do 3/4 of my day on Windows and 1/4 on Macs. So I manage another 250 PCs and computer labs, plus I do a lot of the server infrastructure for the core College of Science stuff. Well, the infrastructure is more just for labs, but there's share points and stuff like that. But yes. Yes, we are. There is central IT, and then there are other admins for different departments. Or yes, yeah. Every college, we have 9 colleges at RIT, and everyone does something different. To my understanding, not right now. I know there's a couple other RIT people in here that are, yeah. So they're kind of learning. So come my office, 1350 Gosnell. So to answer your question, the only other person I know that's currently using DeployStudio is my counterpart on the faculty staff side of things. He just I worked with Jeremy Reichman when he was still at RIT to get the DeployStudio up and running. And then my counterpart, Jeff Mueller, just got Monkey working to add that Jeff Mueller's doing that stuff for faculty and staff. So I just kind of chime in once in a while. But as far as other labs, my DeployStudio is used for science, one liberal arts computer lab, and one lab in a building we call NRH. So we only really, DeployStudio itself probably manages 100 Macs, but I'm only corely responsible for like 47 of them. So, yes? Never tried it. I don't see why not, though. It's what? Horrible? Right. So that's actually a good point to bring up, and for the viewers on YouTube as well. IP helpers are a great thing. We have an entire Class B range at RIT that's all chunked up into multiple subnets. Fortunately, our networking team is awesome, so they allow us to put IP helpers to point back to a single DeployStudio. So that way, if this, what's that? Yeah, if you don't have that, I'm sorry. My recommendation there is that's where you can start using Replica. Put a server on each subnet or something, and kind of have the primary and the alternative. But I have IP helpers, so yes. That was actually before we had an awesome networking team that allowed us to do IP helpers. That's where this script came in. This script will allow you to do cross-subnet booting because it's using the netboot, the bless command to netboot to a specific IP address. So it doesn't need to discover the netboot. You tell it what the netboot is. Yeah, so that's what that's for. I love my networking team. No, and the reason for that is because it still uses AFP 548, port 548, and most ISPs block that because it's file sharing. So you won't be able to mount the repository at home. So, no. All right, I got 2 minutes left. Any more questions, comments, discussion? You guys have, yep.
I was just saying, I a couple months ago, I just one got what the user said on the Active Directory.
Yep.
And we got way more than 50,000 groups.
Yeah.
And I've had no problem.
Really? I know we have a lot of recursive groups that. Back on topic. I got 3 seconds left. Guys, you have been great. I know there's a lot of problems in that process, and I thank you. Thank you for sticking with me through all the problems. So thank you again for coming to the conference, and have a good day.